The year got off to a start with a lightning strike on Newcastle's ill-fated Obelisk. The King hit crumpled the top section into tiny pieces. The waterboard held its promise to repair the well-known landmark. A 21-year-old Georgetown woman had a tough initiation into scuba diving when she suffered the bends late in January. After her first dive off Halifax Park in Port Stephens, Ruth Copus had to be transported by helicopter to Sydney in a special decompression unit.
Good girl, that's good. That's it, swallow, move the mouth forward, click your jaw. Good girl.
At Glenrock, a young man on a school excursion in March fell down a sheer cliff face. Stuart Connell had to be winched to safety by the rescue helicopter in a dramatic moment he will never forget. Also in March, the Air Force lost a Mirage jet, which the pilot was forced to ditch in the sea about 16 kilometres south of Port Stephens. A nearby trawler rescued the pilot after the jet hit the water less than 500 metres from the boat. The pilot escaped serious injury. It wasn't until November, when a fishing net caught this large section of the lost Mirage, that investigators had any of the wreckage to work with. Mystery over the reasons for this dramatic accident off the Bar Beach cliff. The driver accelerated his yellow Commodore straight for the timber guardrail. The car plunged to the rocks below, landing in shallow water. The driver was pulled from the car by nearby beachgoers and treated by ambulance paramedics. It was also late in March when mystery surrounded this boat crash on Lake Macquarie. The cruiser Sonata was struck by a small half-cabin vessel just after dark. In 15 seconds, the small boat sank in deep water off Coal Point. Police divers recovered the body of 41-year-old Colin John Sitkar the next day. Then at Toukley, the most incredible high-speed crash between two speedboats. Incredible because no one was killed. Robert England and Rod Archer both suffered fractured limbs, but lived to tell the story, despite one of the boats literally spearing the other while racing at a buoy. It's just as incredible in slow motion any way you look at it. In May, an air show turned sour when this 1947 Astor single-engine plane clipped power lines over the Hunter River. Both wings were sheared off. The pilot broke his legs. His passenger also suffered fractures. It was also a lucky escape from death for two Air Force pilots who lost their Mackie jet over Barrington Tops. Dennis Hume and Brendan Heslin ejected from the jet after engine problems. They spent a cold 4 hours perched in a tree before being rescued by the National Safety Council helicopter. Late in August, a runaway train near St Heliers at Muswellbrook. 25 wagons got loose and travelled 2.5 kilometres down the track before running off the rails and demolishing a signal box. The signalman jumped to safety just seconds before impact. Despite the strewn wreckage, nobody was hurt. A small bedroom fire in this house in Toronto claimed the life of a baby boy in October. The child's father, John Britton, was a well-known West Lakes identity. At the time, it was believed a waterbed heater had started the fire. Then a day Radio 2KO will never forget. The NBN helicopter clipped its rotor blades on the station's transmitting tower at Sandgate, putting the station off air for 2 hours. The news crew escaped unhurt, but the aerial folded like a piece of Meccano. In November, the first fatal crash involving the new FA-18 bombers. 23-year-old Richard Jeffries from Williamtown was killed when his jet crashed into dense bushland on Palm Island in North Queensland. In November, there was uncertainty about the drowning deaths of 2 war veterans. Bill Hamilton and George Platt were mates from the war. Their upturned boat was found near Snapper Island in Port Stephens about lunchtime. Their bodies were found later that day. The police theory at the time was that a big swell may have tossed both men into the water while they were fishing. Then 2 light plane crashes in the Upper Hunter. This Beechcraft Bonanza came down near Cassillis after engine failure. The pilot and passenger, both from Melbourne, suffered fractures and head injuries. But in December, the 2 young men in this twin-engine Piper were not so lucky. Their plane landed nose first just east of Cassillis. Eyewitnesses say it started in a tailspin moments before crashing. The men, both aged 21, were killed instantly. The year began with the resolution of a big issue for Rathmines residents. The Immigration Department responded to public pressure and allowed the deported Coe family back into Australia. They were forced to leave in 1986 after their visas expired. They spent anxious months in Malaysia awaiting the result of an appeal to be allowed back to the lakeside community and their small Chinese restaurant. By June, they were back in the country again.
Welcome home.
For Aberdeen couple Michael and Sue Manane, they won their battle to adopt a child from Sri Lanka after being told by the Korean government they were overweight and couldn't adopt one from there. A telegram from Minister John Aquilina gave them reason to celebrate late in January.
The helicopter
Leader Snell from Bathurst hit the Newcastle News when she was sent around the state in search of a hospital bed. She was 32 weeks pregnant and was taken from Bathurst to Westmead in Sydney before being flown to the Mater at Waratah.
Unfortunately, the situation had changed by the time that I got there, and they didn't have anywhere to care for the baby either, and they found a bed or room for the baby up here, and I came by helicopter then from Westmead to here.
There were angry scenes in Sydney over the proposed closure of the Newcastle State Dockyard. The workers stormed Parliament House, injuring an attendant in the rush. Some politicians did speak with the men, like former employee John Price.
What chance have we got in Newcastle going to industries and trying to get another job? Oh, you're one of these dockyard workers they put up, one of these non-performers.
But the state government had made up its mind, and early in March sounded the death knell for the yard. But not before it had clocked up millions of dollars in losses, and not before protracted union unrest.
I want to make it absolutely clear that it's not the government closing the dockyard. This dockyard is being closed because of the decision of the men on the job to reject the reform package that could have saved 180 jobs.
Newcastle also learned during 1987 that it had lost the Navy submarine contract to South Australia. It's since picked up the pieces and is now setting its sights on the multi-billion-dollar frigate project with a local consortium in the race. A confidence boost late in the year, with Carrington Slipways winning the $60 million contract to build the replacement ship for the Antarctic supply vessel, the Neladan. But our harbour's reputation was blemished in July during the visit of the Tasmanian vessel, the Abel Tasman. When it arrived with hundreds of passengers aboard, its berth was taken by another ship. And when the special roll-on, roll-off wharf was free, the loading ramp didn't fit. Helen Hughes, in her report, summed up the situation this way.
Whether the shipping line decides to bring passengers here again remains to be seen, for people, unlike cargo, can choose whether they want to come back again. One thing is clear, the incident has done nothing to enhance Newcastle's reputation as a tourism destination.
Then, after months of talks and negotiations, Lloyd Moffat abandoned the Bar Beach Pavilion after the council refused to renew his lease. The prime piece of real estate has remained barren since, as the council struggles with the many development proposals being put before it. Ironically, Lloyd was accused of not providing an adequate kiosk on the beach. The council's dawdling has left beachgoers this summer with no permanent facility at all. Newcastle City Council was again in hot water over the Stockton Caravan Park. It wanted to spend $1.3 million on upgrading the park, but that meant that permanent residents would be thrown out and only tourists would be allowed back in after the upgrade.
Against the motion, just me. And I urge you to keep on with this matter because right is on your side, legislation is your own side, and the council is wrong.
Council has now deferred the work until September, with 20 permanent spaces allocated in the park. Newcastle's Bicentennial project took shape during 1987, the Queen's Wharf complex and the Harbour foreshore park. Due for completion in May, it was not without its critics.
Then they proceed to build a tower to get the view. Now, you used to be able to get the view right along ground level as a pedestrian. I think that ground level view ought to be maintained. Then as you proceed further out towards Nobbies, you find you're amongst a whole area of flat grass lawns, concrete curb and guttering, bitumen and isolated trees in these flat grass lawns. Now that's the lowest level of municipal engineering landscape that can be produced these days, and that marvellous historic site, that very scenic site, deserves something much better than that.
Victory for resident protest action when an archaeological dig uncovered an historical convict site on Newcastle's East End. The find prompted a public outcry, which saw the state government gift the land to council rather than auction it for a major development. Lake Macquarie's bicentennial plans, however, did not go so smoothly. With a change of council at the local government elections in September, came a change of heart over the multi-purpose centre planned for Spears Point. $1 million in bicentennial funding hung in limbo as the council tried to decide what to do. Eventually, a beach improvement and marine research centre won both public and council approval. Another Lake Council election issue was the question of longwall mining under a residential estate at Bolton Point. BHP sought approval for a ventilation shaft for the mine, sparking a series of public meetings and protests. Residents claimed that subsidence would damage their homes. This issue is far from dead and will no doubt resurface during 1988. A major blow to the Maitland community came with the closure of the local abattoir. Metro Meats claimed the costs were too high, throwing long-time employees onto the dole. Negotiations are continuing on whether a workers' cooperative might run the works in the future. Australia's beef export industry suffered a blow when pesticides were found in meat shipped to the United States. The cause was a chemical called dieldrin, which is used to protect fence posts. Hunter Valley Properties did not escape the controversy, with traces of the chemical found in local meats and some farms being quarantined. Alan Bond dealt Cardiff brewery workers a hard hand when he decided to close the local operation. 135 workers were handed their redundancy notices, with Bond Brewing blaming a slump in sales and increased government excise. And after months of controversy, Tomago Aluminium this year got state government approval to dump wastes at its site in the Wallaroo State Forest. Only treated waste, considered non-toxic, is being dumped, but this did not allay the fears of nearby residents that the water supply could be contaminated. Late in October, Western Suburbs Leaks Club decided to demolish the Sportsman's Arms Hotel. It bought the property with a view to expanding the club's facilities. The licensee and tenants were given just 2 hours' notice before the work gangs moved in. Some of the regular drinkers at the pub staged their own protest.
I've been drinking here for bloody 20 years, since I was a West Junior, and what they're doing's bloody appalling.
Council and the police couldn't stop the work despite pleas from the local Heritage Council and nearby residents. And a major issue in country towns during the year was the country doctors' dispute. In a pay wrangle with the state government, doctors seeking relativity with their city counterparts resigned en masse from country hospitals. The people of Merriwar, anxious at having a hospital but no doctors, went public with their grievances. Most affected were expectant mothers with no resolution in sight.
They should stop in Queensland where he originally come from. We want democracy here, not a dictatorship.
We're not here to demonstrate or cause any violence. They're the ones that are going to start anything. They're the ones that brought in the supporters from up the country to start the fights.
If we were in Queensland now, we'd be arrested for just doing this, and we're not doing any harm, are we?
Sir Joe's rally across the park was equally as boisterous, and if nothing else, the Premier stirred up the emotions of the people of Newcastle. For the first time, some of the Premier's policies were outlined by one of his advisors. They are that tertiary students should pay more for their education and that other ways should be found to cut unemployment benefits even further. Sir Joe, the man his supporters call a political giant amongst pygmies, was more positive. Once again, he brought up his keystone policy, the 25% flat tax, and if he becomes Prime Minister, a cut in the price of fuel. All through his speech, the 1,500 demonstrators jeered, calling him a fascist and giving him the Nazi salute. Although there were some disagreements between the small core of Joe's supporters, some of whom were bussed in from the northwest, and the demonstrators, the contingent of watchful policemen had little to do. Sir Joe's speech was followed by a half hour of questions about his policies on abortion, public marches and the right to strike, and the 76-year-old Premier seemed in his element. Sir Joe left the rally trailed by protesters.